Here, join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Coming up on today's Camilla Tominey Show, I'm going to be speaking to Iain Duncan Smith, former Tory party leader, about his chances of winning the next general election without Boris Johnson. I'll also be speaking to Labour's Peter Carl about their solutions for the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I've got a big interview coming up. We're going to be speaking to former Commons Speaker John Bercow. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Good morning, it's 9:30. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. At least 44 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 5 years. Nepal's aviation authority says 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Local television showed thick smoke billowing from the crash site as rescue operations got underway. Hundreds of rescue workers are scouring the hillside. An airport official said those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The 7-year-old girl is in a life-threatening condition in hospital after a suspected drive-by shooting in North London. A total of 6 people were injured in the attack, which happened outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women are being treated in hospital, whilst a second child has since been released. Police are appealing for witnesses and say no arrests have yet been made. The Health Secretary has reportedly told unions he's willing to talk about improved pay for all NHS staff except doctors. According to the Observer newspaper, Unison's chief says Steve Barclay's tone has been very different in negotiations this week. He now wants to persuade the Treasury to offer higher pay rises. It comes as nurses threaten to double down on strike efforts in February if negotiations don't progress. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to the show.
Good morning. Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. Second week running, feeling a little more relaxed. And I've got a promise for you this week. And my promise is that this is going to be a safe space, away from news of those two people over in Montecito, whose names we shall not even mention. Seeing as I've spent the whole week, I think I might have written about 7,000 words on the couple, and we're not going to speak about them for 90 minutes. So enjoy this. Instead, we're going to embrace the political scene, talk about the stories that really matter. I've got Sir Iain Duncan Smith joining me shortly. He's going to talk about whether the Tories have a hope in hell of winning the next general election without Boris Johnson. I'm also going to be speaking to Peter Kyle. He's Labour's shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, about their plans for the protocol. And I know he's the man you love to hate, but brace yourselves. We've got former Commons Speaker John Bercow coming in. I'm going to be asking him about bullying. I'm going to be asking him about Brexit. I'm going to be asking him about everything. Let's have a quick run through of the front pages first of all, though. Now, Sunday Telegraph. This is interesting because we keep on having the Labour leader parking his tanks on Tory lawns. And the Sunday Telegraph front page headline is Starmer Nonsense Bureaucracy in NHS. And he's talking about the fact that he wants to get rid of some of the problems that we encounter when we go to the doctor's surgery. Sunday Times. Windsor peace talk plan ahead of coronations. I'm not going to elaborate on that because there's a couple of names we're not going to mention in the show. The Observer. Cabinet split over NHS pay piles pressure on Sunak. Again, the NHS featuring heavily in today's papers. The Mail on Sunday. Rishi risks being dragged into coronation row. Again, it's a royal story. We'll mention nothing further than that. The Sunday Express doing something completely different. Sex assault during riot at migrant centre is their splash today. We've got on the front of the Mirror, Sunday Mirror, Tory donor tycoons, 4.5 million to destroy PPE. It's a story about the head of Clipper Logistics taking money to destroy PPE that presumably had been ordered with taxpayers' cash. And then the front of the Sun on Sunday, Girl 7 shot during drive-by at funeral, which I think we'll get onto in just a moment. So there's your front pages. I am delighted to be joined by a legend in his own lifetime, Michael Crick, journalist extraordinaire. Thank you very much. I don't know if you remember this, but when I was a young hack, a young buck of a reporter, I once saw you on the tube last week, literally 2 weeks ago. I saw you on the tube and I approached you and I said, I think you're a great journalist, and you were quite shy. And you said, oh, thank you very much, thinking, who is this lunatic? And now we are on the same show together. So tell me, please.
That's great, yeah.
You are my journalistic hero, and tell me what you made of today's papers. There's one story we're calling underplayed story of the day because you think it hasn't quite got the credence it deserves.
Well, it's a quite extraordinary story, which it's not the main story on the front page of the Sunday Times, but it's the one at the top.
Yeah.
And it's all about, it says Johnson had credit facility worth up to £800,000 while in Downing Street.
What?
And the man that he got this credit facility from was his cousin, a man called Sam Blythe. And the more you read the story, the more extraordinary it gets. At the height of the COVID crisis, at the end of 2020, officials in Downing Street were seriously worried that Boris Johnson might not be able to pay his tax bill, which was presumably due, as it is for all, at the end of January. The idea of the Prime Minister not having enough money to pay his tax bill. And of course, why it had happened was that before he became Prime Minister, there was a period where he was making oodles of money from writing a column for the Daily Telegraph, £275,000 a year, plus his MP's salary, plus all his speaking engagements.
Nice work if you can.
And he hadn't lined up enough money or kept enough money back. And at the same time, of course, he had the divorce problems with his wife Marina and the incredibly expensive divorce settlement.
What alarms you more? Is it the amount, or is it the fact that the cousin's involved?
Well, the cousin had guaranteed, underwritten a loan, it seems from this article, But what, and this has not appeared anywhere on any register of interest, but more extraordinary still that this cousin, Sam Blythe, a Canadian, had applied to be chief executive of the British Council, a body run by the Foreign Office essentially to promote Britain around the world. And officials in Downing Street, including the Cabinet Secretary, apparently didn't know that Blythe was in for a government job at the same time when he's agreeing to give Johnson this credit facility, which doesn't appear on any public register.
But when you say it's not on the register of interest, why not? I thought that was the public record of what MPs do on the side, so to speak, and where they get their money.
There are different registers, as you know, Camilla. There's the MP's register, which is the toughest of all, actually. And then if you're a minister, there's also a ministerial register of interests to make sure that anything in your background doesn't conflict with your work as a minister. And part of the ministerial register is public and part of it is private. And this was on the private register.
It's weird.
So
I don't know why it's private.
And not available for public scrutiny. And this was all okayed by Simon Case and officials in Number 10. And we knew nothing about this.
Teflon-coated Simon Case, as well as Teflon-coated Boris Johnson.
This was all at a time when he's trying to deal with COVID and all sorts of other problems, such as Northern Ireland and Brexit and so on. And and they're worrying, they're tearing their hair out about how do we enable the Prime Minister to pay his tax bill. And you can imagine how awful it would have looked if he hadn't.
But we know money's always been an issue for Johnson, don't we? But also there's some other coverage of him today in the papers talking about the fact that this parliamentary Standards or Privileges Committee hearing is now going to be aired in public. Broadcasters are fighting for the rights to I mean, it's extraordinary. You picked your favourite opinion piece. Now, this is interesting in the Mail on Sunday, isn't it? Because it's basically an opinion piece from beyond the grave. Tell me about this.
Well, last week, Paul Johnson, who was a very well-known journalist in his day, he began on the left, ended up very much on the right. He died at the age of 94. And the Mail on Sunday have gone back and found one of the columns that Paul Johnson wrote for the Daily Mail way back in 1991, I think it is, about the health service and all the problems of the health service. And it might as well be written, well, indeed, it is published today, in which Johnson says, in many ways, the NHS is an old-fashioned nationalised industry, inefficient, overmanned, over-unionised, and a staggering financial burden. It employs well over 1 million people, only 2/3 of whom are directly involved as doctors and nurses in tending the sick. And so much of, I mean, basically it shows that the problems of the health service now are not new.
No.
That people were worrying about this. Johnson was worrying about this more than 30 years ago.
32 years ago. What changes? And we've got this debate going on. It's interesting as well.
He says large numbers of patients sit around waiting, often for hours, sometimes much longer. Yeah, well, for months and years these days.
But that also plays into the theme in today's papers, doesn't it, of Starmer very much trying to ape the Tories with some of these measures. He's talking about axing bureaucracy, having people be able to refer themselves to physios, having people being able to organise their own blood tests. And actually, this will be music to most people's ears, won't it?
Well, it's interesting that Labour clearly have decided that they can't just sort of be sympathetic to... I'm just trying to find the column now, I can't.
No, it's in the Telegraph as well. Labour are playing a clever game here. I mean, last week we heard him in the right-wing press.
Last week we heard noises from Wes Streeting, the Labour health spokesman, about how Labour would be tough on doctors.
Yes, we had him on our show.
And now you've got Starmer saying, look, it's ridiculous how you have to do everything through your GP. You can't self-refer for physiotherapy and those kind of things. Lots of bureaucracy in the health service. And Labour clearly has realised they can't just be sort of sympathetic to the pay demands of doctors and nurses. They've actually got to come out and say something positive, and they've got to show themselves as tough. And that is what Starmer is clearly doing.
It's interesting. They're clearly targeting the NHS ahead of the next election. You've gone for The Sun on Sunday for most shocking front page, understandably. Girl 7 shot in drive-by at funeral. I tell you what's shocking about this, Michael, is that it's only on the front page of one newspaper. Is that because we've become so immune to these sorts of events that they aren't front-page news anymore?
I think there's an element of that, or maybe probably an element of I mean, you've worked in newspapers. I never have, but of maybe by, and then this happened at lunchtime yesterday, 1:30, and maybe by then most newspapers were set on their front pages.
To be fair, the Mirror, I think, did initially splash on
Yes.
it, and then they changed up to this story about this Tory tycoon and the PPE.
But maybe it reflects the fact that there have been so many. But this is, even more horrific. I mean, it was in right next to Euston Station.
Yes. In broad daylight.
After a funeral with 350 people there, and a drive-by shooting. Apparently, one of the according to witnesses, one of the suspects fled into Euston Station itself, pursued by armed police. It is a most dreadful story, and there's a 7-year-old girl who seems to be fighting for her life. It really
pray
is
for her
absolutely
in
terrible.
hospital and her loved ones. Finally, you've chosen for your picture of the day this set of twins. So just explain this. Some lads have sailed a lot across the Atlantic in record time, I believe.
It took them, well, there's two sets of twins. They're called, their surnames friends. So there's Jack, Hamish, Ewan and Arthur.
It's a great picture.
One set is 26 and one set is, one of them is, I don't know which one's which, but one's 24 and one's set of twins is 26.
Yeah, sorry, they've rowed.
They rowed.
They
rowed
look
across the Atlantic.
beefy enough to have rowed.
Yeah, from Devon to Antigua. And it took them 32 days. Quite an extraordinary feat. But I mean, a lot of people have rowed across the Atlantic, but I don't think we've ever had two sets of twins.
Although
before.
You've got some experience with multiple births in your own family, I understand, Michael.
I have. My sisters are triplets.
You're the eldest
genetically identical triplets. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! I bet you felt a little pushed out as everyone doted on the 3 babies.
Well, I think it made me a rather more aggressive person. But having to deal with 3 girls who never quite got the better of me.
I can only imagine. Michael, thank you very much. That's Michael Crick with the papers there. Now, as you know, we're doing something new on GB News. On this show particularly, we're going across the country to find out what you think about the stories in the papers and indeed the people that I interview on this show. So Olivia Utley joins us now from Birmingham. What are people talking about there, Olivia? Nice to see you.
Hello, Camilla. Very nice to see you. Yes, I'm here at Tasteology, a cafe in Birmingham, and we've got our Fab People's panel just behind this door, talking to them about the issues that matter most to them, from strikes to crime to immigration. Without further ado, let's go inside. Hello, Haj. Haj is the owner of Tasteology. Haj, thank you so much for having us here today. How's business going?
Yeah, very good morning, guys, and welcome to Tasteology. Business is getting better, progressing with time, as we have been here for years, so we're helping so much.
Fantastic. And are there any challenges facing your business at the moment?
Not really, except that probably the bills, which is getting worse and worse, and hopefully the government will find some solution for those issues.
Great, thanks very much, and thanks again for having us. Going to introduce you now to our People's panel. First up, we have Mark. Mark is a business owner here in Birmingham. And Mark, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing Britain in 2023?
I think there are so many challenges facing Britain. So the biggest challenge really is the useless Tory government that we've currently got at the moment, and their inactivity. So they've taken no action on illegal immigration, no action on the NHS, no action on crime. And they're not doing anything about the strikes which are crippling the country. So I think that the overall problem is this government, because they just aren't doing anything that people want them to do. And I think that's the biggest problem that we're facing today, particularly the NHS. I think that's a real problem at the moment, because the Tory government's solution to it is throw more of our money at it without actually looking to reform it and do something about it, i.e. reform the waste that goes on within that organisation, and some of the woke projects that it gets involved in. So I think that that's the key thing. It's do something, take some action, and stop throwing our money down the drain.
Thank you. That's a very clear, stark message there for the politicians from Mark. And here we've got Tony, who is a teacher nearby. Tony used to be a Labour voter and is now a floating voter. And obviously Rishi Sunak has a very full in-tray this year. What do you think should be his top priority?
I think the economy is the big thing, bringing down inflation, getting confidence back in the economy. I feel that the country is kind of stagnating a little bit now. I think it needs a boost. I think as regards to what Mark said with NHS money. We can't throw money at these projects and expect everything just to be fine. It needs to, I think there's mismanagement at all levels, in the public sector, in government, ministerial levels, and I think that I'm just totally disillusioned with it all, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Tony. Another stark message there. Jay here is a student in Birmingham. Jay, young voters often feel a bit disillusioned by what's going on in Westminster. How do you think our politicians could win them back?
You're absolutely correct. I'm a young student patriot from the Royal House and Coalfield, and you are absolutely correct that many young people feel very disconnected from the Westminster government. I believe the government priority should be empowering the youth, fight the woke agenda, and empowering and securing Britain.
Thank you very much, Jay. Another clear message. And last but not least here, we've got Sylvia. Thank you so much for coming on, Sylvia. Sylvia is a retired teacher but still working part-time. And you're a floating voter too. What would the Prime Minister have to do to get your vote at the next election?
He really has to deal with crime, as far as I'm concerned. There are so many burglaries, car thefts, and feeling safe on the streets. I shouldn't have to carry one of these, or give my granddaughters, when they go to live in London, one of these, or buy my 18-year-old grandson a stab vest.
Gosh, yeah.
It's terrifying, and I really think that as part of it, he has to control illegal immigration, because we're an overpopulated country. We have too many people.
Yeah.
With infrastructure and housing and so on, and having to deal with that, really.
Great, thank you so much, Sylvia. Another great message there. So thank you from our People's panel, and we will be back to them later. But for now, back to Camilla in the studio.
Thank you very much for that, Livia. If you want to apply for the People's Panel, go to gbnews.uk/panel. I believe we're in Southend next week, so if you're by the seaside, do apply. Now, I'm delighted to be joined now by Sir Iain Duncan Smith. Thank you for joining me, Iain. Let's talk about online safety, because you've gone from Tory party leader to party rebel over this issue. Why is that?
Well, it's not so much rebellion. It's trying to get this this bill in order. It was very wide, but quite loose and quite intervening, but without any focus. The key bit of all of this bill is about safeguarding children. So the bill doesn't have a real safeguard in it, and that's what this is all about. It's about saying to those who are the senior managers, the people that run these online companies, you will bear responsibility if you breach this, if kids are damaged as a result of what you put up on your media side, and there'll be criminal charges on that as well.
I sense there's some mood music from the Culture Secretary, Michelle Donald, to move a bit on this, but could Rishi Sunak face a defeat on this as far as the rebellion is concerned?
Well, my understanding is there's certainly around 40 people that have signed it, and it's not because they want to defeat the government. The government's moving in the right direction, but our view is the one big bit in the whole online safety on harms bill is all about children. At the end of the day, that's really the key thing that we have to protect. The group that are least able to support themselves, that's what this is all about. And Ireland's gone in that direction already, and none of these online companies have moved from Ireland. All of this is there, and we promised it twice in 2 manifestos.
Can I ask, because you, first of all, were behind Boris Johnson's campaign and then you supported Liz Truss, are you happy with Rishi Sunak as party leader? Because I get the impression that perhaps people on your side of the party regard him as quite wet.
Well, no, I don't. I don't have a particular view in that regard. I just know that as Prime Minister, he's got a very big task on his hands. My view about this is that this is not over yet. Although the polls are very big for Labour, it's not like 96, 97.
It's not looking great, though, Iain.
No, well, no, I think the public hasn't made their mind up. With Blair and Brown, they had by that stage. What I get and what I see in the polls, you look at the detailed stuff. There was a poll out 2 weeks ago that showed those who voted Conservative in 2019 have 3 very strong issues they want sorted, and if he does those, they admitted they may well go back to the Conservatives.
But are you worried about your own seat, though, in Chingford, because you're in a marginal? I mean, I know a lot of MPs are getting nervous. They think that there could be a mass exodus from the party come 2024. I'm
not going anywhere. I'm going to fight that seat and win it. And by the way, everybody told me for the last 2 elections I couldn't hold on, and I did. So.
But are you worried about not having the Boris factor, the politician that reaches parts that others can't?
Well, of course, I think Boris, should be back doing campaigning. He's the great campaigner that we have, and he helps change the weather. That's what you want with it. And I hope Rishi and he will come to an arrangement along those lines. I think that would make sense. We should use the best talents we've got in the party and not rule people off because either they've been around too long or because they're not quite
So this
right.
talk of him making a comeback, I mean, you'd like to see that?
Well, I think, when you have a man that is a great campaigner, I think it's useful for you, whatever else, to make sure he's on your side campaigning, because we want to win the next election, because I think that a lot of what's going on in Labour at the moment is a lot of shop window stuff. There's
Although
not a lot
he's
of
got
detail
this
behind it.
privileges committee looming ahead that we now understand is going to be televised. Do you support that? The idea of televising what should be a private committee?
No, I don't actually. And by the way, I just wonder what they're trying to find out, because, everything has been dug out. My general sense is, from the public, is they're sick and tired of the story, really. I mean, most people have moved on. Boris has gone. He's no longer Prime Minister. This looks to me like it was something started to get rid of Boris, but ended up not actually happening because Boris is gone. And the truth is, right now, there are bigger issues: NHS, taxation, growth, get the boats across the channel stopped. These sort of things are big issues for most of the public, not internal workings of Parliament.
Let's talk about taxation and growth, because I would imagine that somebody of your persuasion thinks that taxes are too high on the electorate, and equally perhaps that the Treasury is overcautious when it comes to economic policy. We learnt this week from the latest figures that growth was higher than expected. Perhaps it's the World Cup factor, but the Treasury has now got another £11 billion to play with. Is this symptomatic of this idea that the Treasury is far too negative about this country's prospects?
Well, the one thing to remember is almost every single forecast produced by the OBR or any of the great and the good is almost certainly wrong. We start from that. All of the forecasts were very pessimistic. I thought far too pessimistic. I think that they've felt the UK economy was going to go deeper into recession. I've never felt that. I think these figures show that there's a very good chance that we'll be able to come out and start growing, and that's the key.
But that doesn't seem to be Hunt and Sunak's attitude. I mean, it's all very much steady as she goes. It's all going to be terrible. Nobody can see this growth pie growing.
Well, the truth is, two things happen. First of all, the UK economy is shown in these figures. It's much more resilient. After all, there's still huge numbers of jobs out there. Filling them is the problem, not, having to support people out of work. That's the key bit. And the second bit is, I think Rishi Sunak, as I know him as Prime Minister, is in his heart somebody who wants to reduce taxation. So there'll be a moment, and
there's nowhere else it can go, let's face it.
Well, I know, it's too high, and he knows that, but we've got to get the taxes down. We do it at the right moment, which is sometime in the early part of this year, I think, and I think that will help drive greater growth. And if we get that, I think the game of who wins the next election starts to change quite dramatically.
Although, how did you feel when Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Jonathan Ashworth turned up at your think tank in the week at the CSJ, the Centre for Social Justice, talking about what Labour would do about welfare? I mean, he gave the kind of speech that you would have given?
I think I'd already given it, actually. I think the truth is
plagiarism.
I think CSJ's never been an organisation to favour either the Conservatives or any other party. It's an organisation about how do you best help the poorest and the most deprived in society. If people want to come and join our ideas, I'm in favour of that.
But it's a direct appeal to Tory voters, isn't it? I mean, you've got Labour parking their tanks on your lawn.
Yeah, but to be fair, he actually based almost all of what he said on what the CSJ had already written and argued with the government. Now the government is saying, well, we might end up doing the same. That's the point of having an organisation like the Centre for Social Justice. It makes politicians face up to the reality that change is necessary. How do you do it? How do you get more people back into work and people off sick?
While I have you with your Foreign Affairs hat on, the execution of this UK Iranian national, the Deputy Defence Minister there, is obviously shocking. There's now talk in the papers about us re-entering the fray when it comes to the Iran nuclear deal. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I have for some time considered that the Iranian nuclear deal is a bad deal. They've got everything out of it they wanted, and the rest of the world hasn't got a hold on the nuclear development.
So we shouldn't do it?
Well, I would come out of it. I'd also, personally, I think it's time for us to sanction, and we should have done it ages ago, the Revolutionary Guard, why we've dragged our feet when others have done it. And finally, I think we may even consider bringing our ambassador back.
Thank you very much for that, Iain Duncan Smith. We'll be speaking to John Bercow next, but here's a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Still plenty to come on today's show, including John Bercow live in the studio. But first, here's the news headlines with Ray Addison.
It's 10 a.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. And we can now cross to central London, where in the last few minutes the Metropolitan Police have given a statement following a shooting yesterday which injured 6 people, including 2 children.
OK. Great. I'm Jack Rowlands, I'm the neighbourhood superintendent for Camden, and I'm here to read you a statement about the incident that happened yesterday. Just before 1:30 p.m. yesterday, we were called to reports of a shooting outside St Aloysius Church in Phoenix Road, Camden. Officers responded with paramedics and a crew from the London Air Ambulance. They found multiple people with injuries caused by pellets from a shotgun. 4 women, aged 21, 41, 48 and 54, were taken to central London hospitals where thankfully their injuries were assessed as non-life-threatening. The 48-year-old woman has sustained potentially life-changing injuries. 2 children were also injured. A 12-year-old girl sustained a leg injury. She was treated at hospital before being discharged yesterday afternoon. She is expected to make a full recovery. A 7-year-old girl was more seriously injured. She remains in hospital in a stable but life-threatening conditions, and our thoughts are with her and her family. The incident took place as mourners gathered outside the church following a funeral. We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR, likely a 2019 model or similar. This was a shocking incident. People came here to attend a funeral, to be with friends and loved ones and mourn together. Instead, they were the victims of a senseless act of violence. We know it will have had a significant impact on communities across Camden, and we will have a visible police presence in the local area in the coming days and weeks to provide extra reassurance. And as your neighbourhood superintendent, I will assure that will be happening. I can promise that we are doing everything we can to identify and bring to justice those who are responsible for this attack. The investigation is being led by the Met's Specialist Crime Command. We have a significant number of specialist detectives and local officers working around the clock, but we also need the public's help. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it. Your information could be vitally important, no matter how insignificant you think it is. Please call the Metropolitan Police on 101 or Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111. Thank you very much.
Superintendent Jack Rowland's there with a statement on that drive-by shooting in Euston in central London. We're on TV, online and on DAB Plus radio. You're watching and listening to GB News. Back now to the Camilla Tominey Show.
Welcome back. We've got John Bercow coming up in about 10-15 minutes. Earlier today, I spoke to Peter Kyle. He's Labour's Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, and I asked him how would Labour deal with this thorny issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol.
We've got to get data across the line. We've got to get things like having some of the fast track for some of the goods that are going to go across from GB into Northern Ireland, but only going to remain in Northern Ireland. We've always known the landing zone because it was 18 months ago that the British government published its command paper. It was 15 months ago the EU published its command paper, and there's an enormous amount of overlap. This has been the most protracted period of negotiations where both parties agree on the vast majority of it, but they haven't been able to get something across the line. And that's because obviously the last year has been complete turmoil in the Tory party and in the governing party here, the government here. And there's been so much time wasted on the internal factions and the 3 prime ministers, 4 chancellors, 4 budgets. They've not been over there negotiating with our partners. And always in this situation, it is Northern Ireland that suffers the most. Neglect in Northern Ireland, from Westminster, from the government here, is the thing that underpins all of the challenges that we now face in Northern Ireland. Neglect from the Tory government. So we need to make sure that we get a deal across the line, that the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State and any other minister in government that needs to have an impact on Northern Ireland gets over there and starts diligently rebuilding our politics there.
But what kind of deal is Labour after? Because we had Keir Starmer in the week saying that he was willing to give the Prime Minister cover, that Labour would support any vote that the Tories might bring on the protocol. But I think people watching this will associate Keir Starmer with somebody who tried to frustrate the Brexit process and think that your compromise is actually a concession to the EU.
No, what we want is what the UK government said it would deliver 18 months ago in a command paper. It's out there, it's been published. We just want that delivered. And there's big overlap. So, for example, the UK government said it wants a fast track. The EU says it wants a green lane. I mean, it is, Camilla, it is literally that.
Yes.
They can't get in a room and decide whether it's a fast track or a green lane. That is what it has been about for 18 months.
But there was a bit of concern, I think. Tim Shipman's written about this today in the Sunday Times, about the term green lane. Perhaps, I mean, it might sound like semantics, you know, looking like it's too far in Sinn Féin's corner, and therefore they want to avoid the colour green because they're concerned about people who might prefer the colour orange. I get that.
Camilla, you and I could resolve that one here, right now. Why has it taken 18 months for the government and the EU to get together to solve it? That's the problem.
But you must also accept that the EU has been intransigent on this, hasn't it, sometimes? Some of these checks that they're trying to carry out, for instance, on sandwiches going between the UK and Northern Ireland is absolutely preposterous. They've dug their heels in unnecessarily. Many people think because they're trying to punish the British for Brexit.
Both sides need to get into a room and negotiate. Statecraft, diligence and graft. Those are the things that's going to solve these problems. What really worries me is, I mean, you mentioned sandwiches. I think it's a really good example. You know, the previous generation, led by Tony Blair from Westminster, but you had Bertie Ahern and you had these titans, John Hume, David Trimble in Northern Ireland, who they came together and delivered peace. They literally ended conflict on the island of Ireland. This generation can't get together and get a prawn sandwich from Britain into Northern Ireland.
I know, but I'm just saying it's not just a UK problem, isn't it? It's also down to the EU being quite difficult about this entire issue because they're using the protocol as a stick with which to beat the British.
There is no question that both sides needed to give. Now, what's interesting is that the EU has changed some quite fundamental points on this. You know, for example, some of the you know, the fast track and some of the way of getting goods into Northern Ireland is going to stay there. They've shown some quite remarkable flexibility now that they weren't showing a year ago. Now that's been unlocked once Liz Truss gave way and James Cleverly came in, and then suddenly what they call the mood music changed. So we know that diligent negotiation can deliver. Of course, when negotiations break down, sides move to more extreme positions. They move apart. We're seeing it right now with the strikes. We're seeing it right now.
Well, we'll get onto the strikes in a minute.
We will. But we're seeing it in the way the government acts.
So therefore,
it drives parties further apart.
So then, therefore, you might agree that the likes of Chris Heaton-Harris and Steve Baker deserve congratulations for actually breaking this impasse finally with a meeting last week and now another meeting we understand tomorrow.
Well, I'm not going to congratulate anyone until they bring the deal back. It's been 18 months late.
The deal's been taken out of the deep freeze, let's put it that way.
Well, we don't know that yet, because every time, you know, even today, the language has changed from last week. Last week was a really good sign that James Cleverly got on a plane and went over to Belfast to meet parties. A really poor sign that two of the parties, or one of the parties, wasn't allowed to go in with the delegation they chose, and therefore one of the other parties refused to go in.
You're talking about Sinn Féin, Mary Lou McDonald not being allowed at the table. Would you have her there?
Well, myself and Keir Starmer went into Northern Ireland for 2.5 days last week, and we did meet with them. Because this is the thing about Northern Ireland. It is not like.
Would you have invited them to that meeting then?
Well, they would. What you do is you don't necessarily invite. The British government doesn't get to choose who turns up in different delegations. This is the key thing about Northern Ireland.
Well, I think they do decide, don't they?
We're talking about a territory. Well, hang on a sec. Don't pretend that Northern Ireland is like the rest of the United Kingdom, or indeed.
No, but you're talking about. We've got the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement being signed, and therefore, presumably, in order for this to work, all sides need to be represented at any negotiation. And Mary Lou McDonald wasn't, and I want to know your view on that.
This afternoon, I'm flying to Northern Ireland. I'm flying to Derry, Londonderry. That's a city that I use two names for. This is not a sort of place that is like anywhere else in the United Kingdom. And yes, we have a city that two different communities call two different names. And it's the same with our politics. You know, so yes, we wanted to meet, or the government wanted to meet, a delegation from Sinn Féin. They turned up with somebody who they perceive, on their terms, is somebody who is president of Sinn Féin for the island of Ireland. Now, that's important for the way they view their politics. The way we got Good Friday Agreement over the line was to respect that different communities perceive their identities in different ways on the island of Ireland. So to not allow progress to be made because the British government goes in with a preconception from Westminster which is existential to one community in Northern Ireland, and to allow that to be the barrier to making progress on a key political gridlock in Northern Ireland with the protocol is absolutely, it's a failure of statecraft, but not just statecraft on a high level, it's a failure of statecraft 101.
OK, well, let's talk about political gridlocks in another sense. You mentioned strikes earlier. Obviously, there's this spirit of conviviality coming across from Keir Starmer. He says he wants to help Rishi Sunak get this vote across with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Look, you receive millions from the unions. You've got a close relationship with union barons, if we can still call them that. Why aren't Labour helping when it comes to trying to stop these strikes? We've got nurses going off again on Wednesday and Thursday. We've got, again, the threat of a teachers' strike. Why aren't you using your own statecraft to help with that?
Because we're not in government. Only government can...
But you've got an influence over the unions that are paying a lot of MPs a lot of money and the party itself a lot of money.
Only government, only ministers who are elected by the British people and come from Parliament can negotiate on behalf of the country and the Treasury and government. So if the government cannot negotiate with the unions, if the government cannot create the conditions where workers can go to work and they're satisfied with work and the conditions in work and also the pay, if they can't do that, well, of course, there is a way that they can get the Labour Party to come in and sort the problem out, and that's to call a general election
and a cross-party alliance on Northern Ireland, why not on strikes?
No,
you're there, you're at the sharp end, you're friends with these unions.
You know full well that Northern Ireland is a very specific issue. The peace in Northern Ireland was hard won. The peace in Northern Ireland needs to be maintained. And actually, the Labour Party doesn't stand candidates in Northern Ireland right now because we want to make sure that we can play the honest broker for all of Northern Ireland so that we can go in, represent all communities, geographically all of Northern Ireland and all cultures as well. Very important thing to the Labour Party that we do this. So when we say we're going to help get a deal across the line in Northern Ireland, that would heal and help Northern Ireland move forward. It would respect the way that we should be doing things from Westminster.
Okay.
The neglect from Westminster has started making sure that Northern Ireland's moving backwards rather than forwards.
Let's just
so
talk
yes,
about...
we are happy to help in other ways constructively. Of course, we've offered votes to Rishi Sunak in recent months on other areas, and he's rejected the offer.
Let's just talk about Labour Party politics finally. The Labour Party is doing very well in the polls. It's 27 points ahead, and yet Starmer's approval rating still isn't brilliant. According to a YouGov poll, 41% think he's doing a bad job. 46% don't think that he looks like a PM in waiting. So the party's good, but the leader's bad, Peter. That's a problem, isn't it?
You can't say the leader is bad.
I'm just quoting polling.
We know from absolute history, the last election, that if the public didn't respect the leader, we wouldn't be doing so well in the polls. So the two are absolutely linked together. Keir Starmer is a diligent. He drives forward progress in the Labour Party.
People, seemingly.
Well, seemingly he is, because you said we are 27 points behind the Parliament. If he wasn't, I don't think that people are out there are looking specifically at individuals in the top team and saying, great, we're going to go for a leader because of that, we're going to go for the Labour Party because of that one person. We are a team. Keir is very, very good at driving a team. The Labour Party has changed profoundly in the last couple of years because of what Keir Starmer has done to us, what he has insisted we do. He's raised the standards and the bar for what's expected from us.
We wouldn't want this to turn into a party political
and we are ahead because of Keir, not in spite of him.
All right. Well, good luck in Belfast this week again. Thank you very much, Peter Kyle.
Thanks.
Well, that was Peter Kyle talking to me earlier. Now I'm joined by John Bercow, former Speaker of the House of Commons. John, good morning.
Camilla, good morning to you.
Thank you for joining me. Look, let's grasp the nettle instantly. You've been described as both a serial liar and a serial bully by this Commons investigation. You've not been allowed to have a parliamentary pass.
I never asked for one.
So this idea that you've been banned from Westminster, talk me through that and your reaction to how you've been labelled, because it is extraordinary for people watching. You go from being Speaker of the House of Commons, a very prominent and indeed recognisable figure in Westminster, to effectively not being able to get into the building.
I've not been banned from Westminster, that's the first point. The second point is that I was told that I couldn't have a parliamentary pass. Camilla, I didn't ask for a parliamentary pass, so it's a completely toothless, meaningless, absurd and implausible sanction. Thirdly, what I would say to you is, look, I'm not without flaw or blemish. To err is human. I've made my fair share of mistakes, but I don't believe that I've bullied anyone in any way, anywhere, at any time. And when it was suggested that I had lied, many things have been said about me over the years, but not that I'm other than straightforward and candid. I haven't lied about anything, and I don't believe that I bullied anyone. I think perhaps the most significant thing to say is this. It was an amateurish, ramshackle, hopelessly flawed process of investigation undertaken into me, and the most important point resulting from it is that those historic investigations of matters going back 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years immediately ceased after my case. So everybody now is capable of being investigated only if a complaint is made within 12 months. I had people making allegations about what I did or didn't say unwitnessed in a room a decade or more earlier. It's an absurd process of no weight or credibility.
I think you've called it Kafkaesque in a piece that you wrote for The Telegraph last year.
To say it's a kangaroo court is a very marked insult to kangaroos.
Let me just put you a quote that Catherine Stone, who was the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, she spoke to The Times yesterday, and she said, "Forgive me a wry smile to myself. Mr. Bercow appointed me, and he forgot to say that in his many and various interviews where he was critical of me. So he appointed me knowing very well that I already had a reputation for being independent, impartial, thorough and fair." There is an irony here that you've been brought down by the very woman you appointed.
I appointed her. And I never sought to hide the fact that I appointed her. So when Catherine Stone says with a wry smile that I neglected to point out, I didn't neglect to point out. It wasn't germane to any of the interviews that I undertook. The question of who appointed her is totally irrelevant to the fairness or otherwise of the process that was undertaken. It was a lousy process, amateurishly conducted, ill-conceived and abandoned after my case. That is the brutal, simple, unmistakable and incontestable reality of the matter. So she's had her say, and I've answered her conclusively and in terms.
Talking about brutal realities, you did try and stop Brexit, didn't you?
No.
As Speaker.
No, I didn't.
Many people watching this will think that you very much tried to frustrate at least the process, especially when you said, no, there couldn't be another vote because we've already had a meaningful vote. Got people on the Tory right tearing their hair out at you, thinking that you're not impartial. We know that you've got stickers on the back of your car talking about
this is all no doubt sincere.
I mean, you're an arch Remainer.
This is all no doubt
sincere in that role?
This is all no doubt sincere, Camilla, but it suffers from the disadvantage of, without exception, being completely wrong.
But you are an arch Remainer.
Let me answer the point about the 3 votes.
Yeah.
And you say that I angered, to the point of enormous consternation, the Conservative right in ruling that there couldn't be a 3rd vote. No, sorry, that's not correct. The government was annoyed about it. Actually, Jacob Rees-Mogg, as the Hansard record will attest, was all in favour of my decision on that matter, and so were a very large number of other Brexiteers. What I was simply saying is that Theresa May cannot seek to bamboozle the House and beat it over the head by continually putting to the House a proposition in defiance of the same question convention again and again and again. So that wasn't generally ridiculed
I mean,
or denounced.
You said earlier, you're only human. You obviously have this visceral hatred of Brexit. You said that it was the biggest mistake that had been made since the Second World War.
I said it was the most colossal foreign policy blunder in the post-war period.
So you privately think that. How on earth can you carry out your role when you're meant to be impartial? Clearly, your whole opinion on the issue is totally screwed. It's totally skewed.
No. The logic of that argument, Camilla, and I know you've got a job to do, is that anybody in order to be Speaker has never previously had or does not entertain an opinion. The issue for Speaker is not that he or she has never had an opinion about anything, but that he or she discharges the duty of the office of Speaker fairly, impartially, dispassionately, and with a view to ensuring that all views are represented. And that's exactly what I did on Brexit. If you cast your mind back, and I know you've got a keen historical sense of these matters, Camilla, to 2013, you will be well aware of the John Barron amendment tabled to the Queen's speech by the Conservative Member of Parliament for Billericay, John Barron. That was a an amendment to the Queen's speech calling for a national referendum on British membership of the European Union. I selected that amendment.
Yes.
If I was this unfair, arch-Remainer, frustrate the Brexiteers at all costs character, as which you try to typecast me, I wouldn't have selected it.
I'm
Why
only
did I
reflecting
do
what
it?
GB viewers might think.
Why did I do it? I did it because I thought it was the fair thing to do. So I was fair to the Brexiteers when they were a strong but minority force within the governing party.
So
I did the same for the Remainers.
Let me put this to you
after
then.
2016, and that's what the Brexiteers didn't like.
Let me put this to you. Did you quite like being at the centre of that story? I say this because I'm going to quote your biographer here. Bobby Friedman described you as having no chance of any approach. Bercow is somebody who is always loved being the centre of attention. Aren't you a bit of a show-off? And that's why you made such a splash during the Brexit debates.
I did what I thought was right. So the answer to that is, yes, I am a bit of a show-off. I think most politicians are to a degree. And if you say, do you like the sound, mellifluous or otherwise, of your own voice, I plead guilty to that. Do I talk too much? I plead guilty to that. Was I unfair? No. Did I try to do the right thing at all times by all parts of the House and all shades of opinion? I did so relentlessly for over 10 years. And I make the point again, it is quite an important point, whether people agree with it or not, that what I was seeking to do, Camilla, was not to frustrate, to impede, to retard, to prevent Brexit. What I was seeking to do was to facilitate the House of Commons in the discharge of its functions. It wasn't for the Speaker to support and implement Brexit or to prevent it.
Can I say this? Wasn't there a little bit of an attempt to humiliate Boris Johnson because you just don't like him?
Sorry, when and where did I seek to humiliate Boris Johnson?
Well, I get this impression that,
what did I say or do to try to humiliate him?
This idea that he was trying to deliver Brexit, this ready-made, oven-made deal, and that his entire premise was on the basis of delivering the Brexit that Theresa May couldn't. And I just wonder, on a personal level, did you dislike Boris Johnson?
No, on the contrary. In fact, why should I have been out to get Boris? When he was Foreign Secretary, and he and I got on very well, he was always very amicable and good-natured, he invited me to the Foreign Office residence, and we played tennis together. And I had the very great and delectable joy of beating him 6-love, 6-love, 6-love. And we had a very convivial lunch afterwards.
Why don't I put it like
I had
this?
no reason to feel any animus towards him at all.
Can I ask you this,
What he
then?
tried to do was to humiliate the House of Commons by illegally proroguing Parliament. And I remind you, just in case it has
Baroness
slipped your
Hale,
mind...
I was there. I was there when she read out the reading with her spider brooch.
11-0, was it,
I get
Camilla?
that. No, I know. As a football man, you'll think that's a good result. However, on the subject of Boris, OK, let me put it a different way. You're obviously Speaker of the House of Commons. You witness much parliamentary talent and perhaps a lack thereof. Who do you think has been the worst Prime Minister who served while you were Commons Speaker?
Oh, by a country mile, Boris Johnson was the worst Prime Minister. But that doesn't mean that I feel personal hostility to him. I don't feel
Why did you think he was terrible? Did you not think he was fit for office?
No, I didn't think he was fit for office. I thought he was immoral, unethical, unfocused, utterly devoid of any coherent vision or plan for the country.
He's still got a parliamentary pass.
He is, I think, without doubt, the worst public speaker of any Prime Minister I've ever heard. I've never known anybody so fumbling, hesitant,
his speech when the Queen
inarticulate
died.
and useless. He made one good speech. One good speech
He made a
doesn't
rousing
redeem somebody.
Brexit speech when he left as Foreign Secretary and over checkers.
No, he made a very poor quality speech.
Who was your
from the
favourite
backbenches.
orator in the House then?
From the backbenches, he made the worst speech I've heard.
Who was your favourite speaker in the House by the time, in all of the time that you were there?
My favourite public speaker or Prime Minister?
Parliamentarian, even if Prime Ministerial or otherwise.
I would say that the best debater I ever heard in the House of Commons was Robin Cook, closely followed by Ken Clarke and Malcolm Rifkind. But I would say Robin was the most coruscating debater I ever heard. In terms of sheer fluency, Camilla, I would say the best public speaker, he wasn't as good a debater, I heard, was Tony Benn.
Yes.
And there is a difference,
Tony
which
Benn, yes.
may or may not interest your listeners and viewers. Robin wasn't quite the orator that Tony Benn was, but Robin was formidable in the interstices of debate. He was the quickest-witted, he was the sharpest, he was the most excruciatingly painful to be attacked by in debate. Tony wasn't really interested in debate. Often he would say to people trying to interrupt him, well, if the honourable gentleman doesn't mind, he can try to catch Mr. Speaker's eye in due course. I'd like to develop my own argument, if you don't mind. And he would just go on with a absolutely uninterrupted flow of majestic eloquence.
And speaking about you, just because you're talking about Labour and Tory MPs there, what is it with this Damascene conversion that you've had, which seems to be counterintuitive? You've gone from being quite hard right to left as you've got older. That's not the way it's meant to work, John. You're meant to become more right-wing as you get older. What's gone on?
So says Camilla Tominey.
Well,
so says GBNews.
There's something about having there's a quote about having a heart and a brain, and it's that you know this to be true. So you've become more left-wing as you go. What's that all that about?
I think that after a long period of reflection and the experience of electoral wipeouts of the Conservative Party, I came to the conclusion that the Conservative Party was wrong-headed on several fronts. So it wasn't a Damascene conversion, it was a process of gradual evolution of political thinking from being very right-wing to seeing the shortcomings and weaknesses of a hard right position in terms of the damage to public services, the level of inequality and so on. The Conservative Party...
What, under Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt?
The Conservative Party has moved right over a period of many years. Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are presenting a different face to the Conservative Party from that presented by Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. But deep down, they are the party of the hard right. The Conservative Party is unrecognisable from the party of Heath or even, to some degree, of Thatcher. And certainly that is why people like Michael Heseltine, Chris Patten, etc. find it so difficult these days to say anything positive about their former party. It's left
What's your relationship now with Labour? Have you been suspended by Labour?
Well, there was a suspension at the time. I pay a subscription to the Labour Party, but I'm not involved in active politics. And I come on your show at your kind request.
I know, and I'm grateful that you've come on.
I'm delighted to do so. But I'm here very much in the capacity of a commentator. So if you look me in the eye, Camilla, and say to me, you know, John, have you got some plan behind your furrowed brow to arrange a return to frontline politics? I have absolutely no plan to return to frontline politics at all.
What do you want to do? Because obviously it's quite unprecedented, but you haven't been given a peerage. You're not in the House of Lords.
Sure.
Are you now advocating Labour's policy of abolishing the House of Lords?
I think the Labour Party wants to get rid of the House of Lords as it currently stands and to replace it with something else, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. My position is that, as you rightly say, I have moved leftwards over the years. I would like to see, and I very much hope that I will see,
but were you
a Labour
upset
government
about not being allowed in the House of Lords?
Well, I made it clear that if I'd been invited to go to the House of Lords, I would have done so, but that hasn't happened.
I mean, Boris Johnson has, I think, appointed a 29-year-old spad to the House of Lords, and not you.
Look, I'm not a trophy hunter, and I would hope that even my most acerbic critics would accept that in office, for example, over a decade as Speaker, I sought to do things. I attempted to make a difference.
Yes.
I went about the process of transformation. I tried to reform the House to make it more lively, more dynamic, more interrogative, more contemporary, more relevant. And I tried to reform the way we operated across the parliamentary estate. So I did all sorts of things to make the place more child-friendly, more focused on young people, to build a relationship with civil society and so on. But there are people who are in public life, hopefully a minority, in pursuit of baubles, in pursuit of status, in pursuit of accolades. That wasn't me. What I'm concerned about is trying to do things that make a difference. What do I do now? I do a lot of public speaking for a living.
You come on GBNews with me.
I work as an academic lecturer at London University. I come on GBNews to talk to very agreeable people like you. And we haven't even, Camilla, I mean, stone the crows and
we haven't even got there. We'll have to do another one.
Tennis.
John,
and you
thank
and I
you.
love tennis.
Thank you for that, John. Here's the news headlines with Ray Addison.
10:30, I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot in a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. A 7-year-old girl remains in hospital in a stable but life-threatening condition. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl were treated in hospital, with a 48-year-old suffering life-changing injuries. The suspects are believed to have used a shotgun outside a funeral in Euston. Superintendent Jack Rowlands has described the incident as shocking.
People came here to attend a funeral, to be with friends and loved ones and mourn together. Instead, they were the victims of a senseless act of violence. We know it will have had a significant impact on communities across Camden, and we will have a visible police presence in the local area in the coming days and weeks.
At least 64 people have now died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 5 years. The aviation authority says 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Local television showed thick smoke billowing from the crash site as hundreds of rescue workers scoured the hillside. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The Health Secretary has reportedly told unions he's willing to talk about improved pay for all NHS staff except doctors. According to the Observer newspaper, Unison's chief says Steve Barclay's tone has been very different in negotiations so far. He now wants to persuade the Treasury to offer higher pay rises. It comes as nurses threaten to double down on strike efforts in February if negotiations don't progress. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're watching and listening to GB News. Back now to Camilla.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deems & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, we've had IDS, we've had Peter Kyle, we've had John Bercow. I am dying to hear what the People's Panel makes of all this. Olivia Utley's in Birmingham. What are they saying, Olivia?
Hello Camilla, we are back in Birmingham and I'm going to head over to our People's Panel just over here to find out what they made of all of that. So I will start with you, Sylvia. What did you make of that interview with John Bercow?
I disagree with him when he said as a speaker he was impartial and fair. What I do agree with when he said he was a bit of a show-off.
I think lots of the country will agree with that.
And like most politicians, he was full of bluster.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Tony, did you agree with anything he had to say?
Absolutely not. Well, I don't know what he had to say, to be honest, because I think it's a typical... This is the problem with Westminster politics and politicians. They're opportunists. I don't know what any of them stand for now. I mean, he mentioned the fact that the Conservatives are hard right. They're not. They're all neoliberals. They're all cut from the same cloth. And I really don't know where these people stand.
Thanks very much, Tony. Another stark answer there. And what about you, Jay? What do you make
Well,
of
to be
Bercow?
fair, during the Brexit process, when I look back the Brexit process, he did not do his job as a speaker as best as he can. He did not stay impartial, but he's right, he did a bit of show-off, and I believe he's more like a comedian from Westminster than an actual politician, as he should be.
Thank you, but friendlier there from Jay. And finally, last but not least, what about you, Mark?
Yeah, I think John Bercow represents everything that's wrong with Westminster politics, totally out of touch. Dodged the questions by talking about tennis matches with Boris Johnson. And it just represents everything. And to suggest that the Conservatives are hard right, you couldn't put a cigarette paper between the Conservatives and Labour at the moment. And I just think that, you know, it's typical that the things that we talked about earlier don't affect the politicians. You know, we talked about the rail strikes. You know, Rishi Sunak gets a private jet instead.
Yeah.
You know, and things like
the
that.
rest are playing tennis
yeah,
together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to our People's panel, and that's it from us here in Birmingham. For now, back to Camilla, I think, in the studio.
Thank you very much for that, Olivia. I love that. There's not a cigarette paper between Starmer and Sunak. That's probably most people's impression of the current situation. Let's go back to Michael Crick now, veteran journalist, my paper reviewer. I just want your reaction to the Bercow interview, simply because you've written books about all sorts of characters, Alex Ferguson, Jeffrey Archer, our very own Nigel Farage. I mean, you need to do a book on Bercow, don't you? He's an interesting character.
There have been several books on Bercow already, including one which points out that I recommended he should go and put bets on his own election as Speaker, get a friend to put on bets.
Right.
And it was meant as a joke at the time when I recommended that to him way back in 2009. And I discovered a few years ago in one of these books by Sebastian Whale, I think it is, that actually he did that. He got a guy from Lambeth Council to go around putting bets on him in order to improve his odds in the betting lists. And who was the guy? A guy called Michael Keegan, the husband of the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan. I do think seeing that interview, by the way, that brilliant impression of Tony Benn, you need to get him back on the show before Christmas and get him to do all his impressions. He is the most brilliant mimic, as good as Rory Bremner, and he can make a living out of it.
John Bercow on GB News. I like the idea of that. But it's funny, isn't it, why his motivations, like, you dealt with people who kind of come to the end of their parliamentary career, and then what do they do next? He's caught between the devil and the deep blue sea a bit.
Well, he's in trouble because they won't even let him in the building, which I think is absurd. They should let him in the building, and the government should give him a peerage, or he may have to wait for a Labour government for that to happen. Of course, he should go in the Lords. I do think he was a bully. There's enough evidence of that. So many people have said it, both on the record and off the record. I do think, and I voted Remain, but I do think he was biased, and not all the time, but overall. And clearly, I don't think he should have voted Remain while he was a Speaker, which he's subsequently admitted to. But I also think he was a great reforming Speaker, and that is, I hope, what he will be remembered for in terms of backbench rights, in terms of calling ministers much more regularly, urgent questions,
women's
making
rights,
them
babies, nurseries.
And he went out there and promoted Parliament and democracy and around the country. He did so many different things, but his record is tainted, but it is a very good record in terms of reform.
Agreed. Thank you very much, Michael. Will you come back?
Of course.
Please do come back and be my
pleasure.
presenter's friend. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much. That's Michael Crick. Just before we go to my next guest, let's just read out a few of your emails. Don't forget you can get in touch with us on the GB News website. Alan says, Labour always do the same. They constantly say what the government are doing wrong and what they could do better, but they never, ever provide their pie-in-the-sky solution. Getting a room is not a viable solution, is it? And Mark says, so glad Iain has been made a Sir. Politically, I can't think of an issue I haven't agreed with him on, which is something of a miracle. I just wish Boris had brought him in closer to advise on Brexit and moves forward. So much opportunity lost. Well, yeah, I think perhaps although he was party leader, some people may regard on the right Sir Iain Duncan Smith to be the best Prime Minister we never had. But anyway, thank you to all of my guests so far. I'm now delighted to be joined by Cliff Allam. He's a retired major in the army who trained the Brits on how to use the Challenger tanks that Rishi Sunak has now suggested we're going to be giving to Ukraine. He had a telephone conversation with President Zelensky just before the weekend, and I think we've pledged around a dozen tanks. But my question to you, Major, is this a good policy? First of all, you trained our own troops on these tanks. How do they work? How are they crewed? Just speak to us in layman's terms about how these tanks work.
OK, I mean, I didn't train them on my own. There was I was part of a team that trained them to go and do their various operations. So basically there is this. When someone joins the army and decides that they want to be in a tank regiment, they go first of all to something called basic training or phase 1 training, which takes about 14 to 20 weeks. That teaches them how to march up and down, walk in a straight line, tie their bootlaces and all that sort of stuff. Basic soldiering. Every single person does that, okay, when they join the army. They then go to special to arm training, which is called phase 2 training, and in the case of the Royal Tank Regiment and other armoured corps regiments, they go to Bovington Camp.
Yes.
And it is there where they do their training. Now, basically, what should happen, doesn't always happen, but what should happen is that someone starts life as a tank crewman as a driver.
Yes.
Okay, so they are first and foremost trained as a driver. A course of about 7 weeks. They then move on to become the gunner, another 7 weeks, the loader radio operator, another perhaps 5 to 7 weeks, and then they will become a commander. The commander's course is again about 7 weeks.
This makes sense because they're
Indeed.
trying out every role in the tank.
Absolutely.
However, Major Allam, you keep on saying 7 weeks, 7 weeks, 7 weeks. It's going to take months to train the Ukrainians on these tanks.
Yeah, so what I think is going to happen with Ukraine, and I have no way of knowing if this is true, but I would assume, is that they're going to take their soldiers that are already tank crewmen, albeit on a pretty basic tank. Now, a Challenger 2 is a very capable machine.
Yes.
It is complex and it's very, very capable indeed. It's also extremely reliable. But in order to keep it moving and working, the crew have to maintain it all of the time. And that's the beauty of doing all of those crew roles.
But forgive my ignorance, are we sending out troops to help train them on these tanks or just handing these tanks over?
Right, I would expect, and again, I don't know, but I would expect that if we intend to send 12 tanks to Ukraine, which is an incredibly small number, by the way.
Yeah. Does that touch the sides? I mean, I heard somebody on the news in the week saying we probably need 300.
Well, I think what the Ukrainians need is a lot of tanks. What they don't need is a lot of different sorts of tanks.
Yeah.
That creates problems all of its own. So logistic problems and supply and repair and maintenance of the vehicles becomes much more difficult if you've got lots of different types. Now, I'm clearly not a politician, but my view is that what they're trying to do is encourage the Germans to use their Leopard 2 tanks.
Yes.
Leopard 2 is it's equally, or it is quite a lethal machine, but it is not as complex as the Challenger 2, nor as capable, frankly.
So should we be sending better tanks or do we not have any?
We don't have any better tanks. Challenger 2 is probably the best tank.
But I hear this a lot from military types. I mean, our own capability, it's been eroded, hasn't it? Are you concerned as a military man that we don't have our own defences? I think we should be sending tanks to Ukraine, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But often I speak to people in an interview setting who are from the military and they don't seem particularly confident in what we've got, our own hardware, so to speak.
Any military man will tell you we haven't got enough and we need more. The beauty of the British Army is that we'll do whatever they tell us to do over in that house over there. So if they tell us to take 12 tanks to Ukraine, we will take 12 tanks to Ukraine and train the people to use them. I would expect that those crews are already in the UK. If they're not, they will be shortly, being trained down in Bovington. I don't know that for sure, but that's probably what is happening now.
But the point is, it's a great gesture, this, but it's going to take too long for it to make an effective difference in the short term.
Well, they're not going to turn up tomorrow morning and into a fight. And, 12 tanks is an incredibly small number of vehicles to get involved in a tank battle.
So be honest, Major, is this pointless?
I think it's a gesture. I think it's a gesture that might be worth making if we are to get the Germans and others to give Leopard, then that's a good idea.
OK, thank you very much, Major.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining me. Coming up, we're going to be doing our Generation Gap segment. It's going to be about generational wealth, so I look forward to that. But first, a short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Well, coming up at 11 is Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary and GB News presenter. Michael, what have you got on the show today?
Camilla, congratulations on your second show. I was watching John Bercow earlier. What did you make of his claim that the Conservative Party has never been so right-wing? The party that introduced gay marriage, the party that now has record levels of taxation and public spending. Could you make head or tail of that?
No, and I thought that you might have a reaction to that, being perhaps not on the right of the party, Michael. Extraordinary, but a fascinating interview nonetheless. I tell you this about John Bercow, like him or loathe him, he's a character.
He is, and I remember when he was to the right of me. I do think there's been movement to the left, both by John and by the Conservative Party, actually. But he has moved further than the Conservative Party, perhaps. And by the way, Camilla, I see that Harry had a good bash at you in his book.
Yes, he did. And I did write a column in yesterday's Telegraph suggesting that, can I quote the late Queen and say, Michael, that recollections may vary?
I think it's a good quote. Her late Majesty gave us a really good quote to use again and again. You asked very kindly about my show. We're going to be talking about freedom of speech. We've got the Andrew Bridgen case, and of course, we've also got Shamima Begum, who's got a 10-part podcast on the BBC. I'll be talking to Steve Headley from the RMT, and I'm going to be talking about the ethics of artificial intelligence. Now that there's a programme which could write your introduction and mine, and also essays for school students.
We can't have that. We can't put our amazing producers out of work. Thank you, Michael. Tune into Portillo from 11. Now, delighted to bring back... It is my favourite segment, this, but it's probably because I invented it. I mean, that's, you know, my ego doing the rounds. But it's called Generation Gap, and we're going to be talking about generational wealth or intergenerational wealth with my two guests. I'm joined by Chris Hope, my Telegraph colleague. I'm not going to say your name, Chris. I'm just going to say that you're Generation X.
Right.
There you
X,
are.
that's me.
And I've got Adam Jogi, and you are a millennium.
Yes.
A millennial.
I think so.
Adam, I think so. So you're in your 20s.
31.
And Chris...
Just out.
Oh, you're 31?
Yes, sorry, just out.
Oh, you're a bit old. And then...
So just over 50.
All right, you've reached your half
sneaking
century.
over, thank you.
And obviously this has been in the news. Now, the front page of the Times this Tuesday, as well as a number of other papers, ran with this story suggesting that over 50s be made exempt from income tax as a way of getting people back into work. This is how it was covered by the Mail Online. Look at exempt in capitals there. This is an outrage, says the Mail Online. And obviously, you're both from two different generations. So let's have this out. Adam, when it comes to this idea of income tax, I mean, is this just preposterous? Alleviating over 50s who come back into work. I'd like to know what happens to over 50s who remained in work. They have to pay income tax, but over 50s who have retired and then changed their mind can come back. What do you think?
I definitely think that the government would need to think again for any suggestion that this would be a good idea. I mean, look, there's no doubt that the economy is difficult times. Young people have been on the front line and facing some of the harsh effects of recent years, and any idea that we would exempt some at the older spectrum, I think would be dangerous.
I mean, you're a Labour councillor. You used to be mayor of Haringey. You must appreciate that these sorts of policies that have to appeal to millennials like you are potentially going to win whoever wins the next general election, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we need to, whoever is going to form the next government has to have a set of policies that plays to and provides for all parts of our community and all parts of our country. And I think that does require a sensible, thought-through approach, and I'm not quite sure this covers that.
Chris?
Well, as a Gen Xer, thank you for having me on. I mean, I think that that policy is doing is they're worried about 300,000, 500,000 over 50s who left the workforce during COVID. They were probably felt they could, mental health reasons maybe, it could be to do with why am I working so hard when I've paid off my mortgage, what am I doing here? And so it's targeted narrowly at that cohort because they are worried about productivity. We'll see more from this from Jeremy Hunt this year, and that's why he's doing it. So I can see why they're doing it. I mean, I think in isolation it looks a bit strange to let over 50s off income tax, but they're trying to get them back to work.
Yeah, and there's something about that, you know, when unemployment and being out of work is some of the most or contributes some of the most dangerous of health inequalities. You know, in Haringey, where I'm a councillor, I will live 10 years longer than someone who's born 10 minutes down the road at my stage, and you'll have people who were in work who aren't in work further down the age spectrum who are now, you know, being forced to make decisions between heating and eating. So something has to be done to make sure that we provide for people. But I think what we probably need, and Chris, you touched on this, is a sensible conversation about it, not just ad hoc policy suggestions thrown in and around.
I'll just throw in there, I mean, there is a legitimate concern among millennials and others, even younger, that, you know, so-called boomers have had it too good. They're owning huge amounts of equity in their own homes. They've got the pension triple locked. And meanwhile, people who are always as successful as you are, I mean, you probably do quite well for your peers, don't you? You're struggling still to pay mortgages and rent. That's not right, is it?
It seems, I think there's an issue of capital transfer. There's an issue of how young people can't get onto the housing ladder. I think there's a planning issue about new houses. I think that there's now understood by lots of people in that boomer generation there's a moral duty to allow more land, more building to get more homes for younger people. I think for younger generations, I would say, looking at, I mean, I grew up without a mobile phone until I was 25. If you look at the opportunities you have now of your generation, I mean, you're looking at something called the 100-year lifers now. People are going to live, a lot more will be living for 100 years by the time, you know, this century is over. But if you look at the opportunity, I think, for university, jobs, the job provision, the job choice open to your generation is nothing that was open to mine. It's so much you could do.
You've got it better than you.
And I think also maybe people are more, HR is better, you know, time off for young dads. I took 2 days holiday when my son was born. Nowadays you get weeks off for work at some
Yeah, look, so for sure some progress has been made. I mean, there's two parts to that, Chris. I think the housing point, there's a big challenge around availability, quality, affordability. My wife and we've been married a week and a half.
Congratulations!
Thank you very much indeed. You're on your honeymoon, the GB studio. What is going on?
This is my return back to my public duties. But, you know, she's an ICU nurse, and on my salary and hers 30 years ago, we'd been able to buy a 3-4 bedroom house anywhere in the country. Now our rent in where we live is, if not the same as, probably more than some of the mortgages that mates of ours who are in their early 40s and early 50s may be paying. So there's a real challenge there about how do we tackle the housing question. I think supply is the biggest point. So you're right, it's looking at making sure that our planning laws and regulations make sense. And then the point about jobs, you know, there's 1 million vacancies in the economy, but there are 1 million people unemployed. How are we making sure that our people have got the skills they need to be competitive at all ages, actually? And there's a big piece of work we're doing where I'm counsel in Haringey called Haringey Learns and Haringey Counts and Haringey Works, which is about making sure people are getting the skills they need to be competitive, whoever they are, whoever they're from, whatever
can I
age.
ask you something, just because sometimes older people do make this argument, the young just don't work hard enough?
Well, I think that's unfair. I mean, if I think about my grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather had 12 children, just the two of them. My grandfather's one wage. He worked at GC in Stafford. When my grandmother was 50, she went back to work. She didn't want to stay at home. She had been very clear about not taking, a single penny of help, and she had 12 children with my grandfather. They were determined to provide for them. So there's certainly a recognition that the power of work is obvious, right? I'm not sure that I would buy the narrative that young people don't work hard enough.
I suppose, Chris, we've spoken about this kind of professionally. You're a grafter. You're sort of like, we both have the mentality at the Telegraph, you're only as good as your last story. And then sometimes, comparatively, people come into the industry who are younger and don't seem to have the same commitment. I mean, am I being harsh?
Probably a bit harsh. A bit harsh, I think. I think it is, there's so much more opportunity now, I think, and people, there's lots more rights for younger people when they come into work in places, and they may say, I don't want to do that, I'll do this instead. Whereas when I came into the industry, it was how high can you jump? I'll jump higher than you want me to jump. It was. I think that was. I think there were more ways into the industry. I think bizarrely through kind of. I'm speaking personally about journalism now, through graduate trainee schemes.
Yeah.
But the route I came through local papers and trade magazines is almost gone.
I know that's true, but also aren't the Tories missing a trick here? I mean, they've got to appeal to younger voters, not just by the way the kind of 18 to 24s that everyone talks about that went
45 and below, right?
Full-throated into Corbynism. Exactly, 45s and below. And what reason would you have under 45 taxed through the eyeballs at the moment to vote for the Tories?
It's hard, and that's the problem. I think you can make it building more homes is the obvious answer, isn't it? And trying to convince Tory. I mean, if you went to all those hustings in the party when they were hearing for the leadership last August, repeatedly members stood up saying we don't want more new homes near us, didn't they? And that led to the policies from Liz Truss, and then was a surrender now from the government on this issue.
But they've become more YIMBY, I think, Tories, because they need to be building homes for their children and grandchildren. Quick point to finish, Adam?
Perhaps, but I think they're worried about, look at places like Cheshire and Amersham and what were former Tory heartlands. People are now saying we're not going to vote for you, so, government seems to be concerned that they can't get the seats they need to win. But one thing I will say, just lastly, and I think this is where Keir Starmer's being very smart about talking about an economy that works for everybody. And young people are working longer for low pay. We've seen pay stagnant for years, and we need to see that get moving. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much indeed for that. The Telegraph's Chris Hope, Labour councillor Adam Jogi, and me, Camilla Tominey. Thank you for watching the show again. Please tune in next week. But here's Michael Portillo.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious, much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.